In the tranquil suburb of Maplewood, where cherry blossoms painted the sidewalks pink and the hum of lawnmowers blended with birdsong, an unsettling scene unfolded in the town's central park. A group of teenagers, their faces flushed with the reckless bravado of youth, gathered around a small, trembling dog. The animal's fur was matted and dirty, its eyes wide with fear as the teen's sneers twisted into cruel laughter. One of them raised a fist and brought it down hard, the impact echoing in the otherwise serene spring morning. The dog yelped, stumbling backward, its legs shaking uncontrollably as it tried to escape the torment. Nearby, a jogger paused, heart pounding not from exertion, but from shock, as the group's laughter mixed with the whimpers of the frightened animal. Unbeknownst to the teenagers, their callous actions were being recorded by one among them, a phone camera capturing every brutal moment. The video, dark and raw, soon found its way online, spreading like wildfire through the quiet streets of Maplewood. The contrast was stark. The town's manicured lawns, tidy homes, and gentle spring breeze now marred by the cruel spectacle of violence against an innocent creature. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. Jake Reynolds sat in his modest living room, the walls adorned with photographs of distant places and moments frozen in time, souvenirs of a life spent in service far from home. A former Navy SEAL, Jake had returned to civilian life seeking peace, settling in Maplewood for its promise of calm and community. His days were now dedicated to quieter battles, advocating for those without voices and protecting the vulnerable. As his phone buzzed on the table, a notification caught his eye, a link to the disturbing video that had begun circulating on social media. He watched in silence, his jaw tightening as the images played out. A dog, battered and scared, surrounded by teens who showed no remorse. The laughter grated on him, stirring something deep within, a blend of anger, sorrow, and an unyielding resolve. The Maplewood he had come to cherish was not immune to cruelty. Beneath its veneer of suburban normality, darkness lurked. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a familiar call to action echoing from his past experiences. The town itself seemed oblivious at first. Spring had painted Maplewood in vibrant hues. Children played in sprinklers, neighbors exchanged greetings over white picket fences, and the scent of fresh blooms filled the air. But beneath the surface, a silent tension began to coil as whispers of the video spread. Some dismissed it as teenage mischief, a reckless prank blown out of proportion. Others felt a sting of unease, a nagging sense that something had been violated, not just the dog, but the community's sense of safety and kindness. Jake's thoughts drifted to Luna, his loyal golden retriever and constant companion. Luna was more than a pet. She was a therapy dog, trained to sense and soothe pain, a living symbol of Jake's commitment to protect. He reached out, her warm presence grounding him as he contemplated the next steps. This was not just about a single act of cruelty. It was a call to confront the apathy that allowed such acts to go unchecked. Meanwhile, the teenagers who had filmed the video remained oblivious to the storm they had unleashed. Their actions, fueled by a mix of boredom and bravado, were shared and reshared, gaining viewers far beyond the borders of Maplewood. Among them was Mark, the ringleader, a boy whose smirk betrayed his entitlement and ignorance. To him and his friends, the video was a trophy of rebellion, a joke at the expense of an animal they deemed insignificant. The consequences seemed distant, almost laughable. But as the video's reach grew, so did the voices of outrage. Local social media pages filled with comments, some condemning the teenagers, others defending them as just kids. The community found itself at a crossroads, torn between denial and the urgent need for justice. Jake knew that silence would be complicity. He began to draft messages to local authorities, his military discipline driving him to seek immediate intervention. Yet, the responses he received were tepid, bureaucratic, an echo of the systemic reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths. The park where the beating had occurred, once a place of laughter and play, now carried an invisible scar. Parents hesitated to bring their children. The grass seemed less green, the air heavier. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to address the fracture in their idyllic world. Jake felt this collective unease keenly, knowing that change required more than outrage. It demanded action. Late one evening, as shadows lengthened over Maplewood's quiet streets, Jake sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating his determined face. He scrolled through comments, messages, and news articles, piecing together the growing narrative. His fingers paused over the keyboard, hesitating only briefly before composing a heartfelt appeal to the town council. He wrote of accountability, of empathy, and the imperative to protect those who cannot defend themselves. The words were steady, resolute, born from a lifetime of discipline and a heart unyielding in its compassion. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blooming lilacs, a reminder that life persisted even in the midst of pain. Jake's gaze shifted to Luna, who rested at his feet, eyes calm and trusting. Together, they represented a force of quiet resistance, a commitment to stand against cruelty in all its forms. Maplewood's spring had been marred by violence, but Jake believed in its capacity for renewal. The video's virality brought with it unexpected allies. Animal welfare groups began reaching out, local journalists sniffed out the story, and neighbors who had once turned a blind eye found their voices. The town was awakening to the reality that beneath its picturesque surface lay wounds that needed healing. Jake's presence became a beacon for those seeking justice, a reminder that courage often began with a single act of standing up. Still, resistance simmered beneath the calls for change. Some parents of the teenagers dismissed the incident as a youthful lapse, urging leniency and understanding. They argued that the teens had made a mistake, that their futures should not be jeopardized by a moment of poor judgment. This divide threatened to fracture the community further, pitting empathy against denial, accountability against protectionism. Jake understood the complexity, the tangled web of fear, denial, and misguided loyalty. But he also knew that protecting the vulnerable was never a simple task. It required confronting uncomfortable truths and demanding more from those in power. His military training had taught him the value of strategy and patience. He would not allow this battle to be lost to apathy. As night deepened over Maplewood, the video continued to ripple through social media feeds, a haunting testament to cruelty and the urgent need for change. Jake's resolve hardened. He would not let the dog's suffering be forgotten, nor would he allow the town to turn away from the darkness that had surfaced. This was the beginning of a fight, not just against a group of reckless teens, but against the complacency that enabled such acts to occur. In the quiet moments before dawn, Jake rose from his chair and stepped outside. The first light of morning brushed the horizon with pale gold, promising a new day. He breathed deeply, the cool air filling his lungs, and felt a surge of determination. Maplewood was more than a town. It was a community capable of compassion and courage, and he would be its steadfast guardian, standing between innocence and cruelty, ready to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Jake Reynolds was a man carved from discipline and compassion. His body still taut with the strength of years of Navy SEAL training, his mind honed sharp by countless missions in hostile lands. Yet beneath the hardened exterior lay a heart deeply scarred by the ghosts of his past. Missions that had tested his limits and left him wrestling with the weight of survival and loss. Since returning to civilian life in Maplewood, Jake had dedicated himself to a quieter, more personal mission: protecting the vulnerable and advocating for those who could not speak for themselves. Luna, his golden retriever and loyal companion, mirrored his disposition. Trained as a therapy dog, she was attuned to the unspoken pain of others, her calm presence a balm to those in distress. Together, they patrolled the quiet streets and parks, symbols of vigilance and kindness in a community that often took peace for granted. The teenagers responsible for the cruel beating of the dog had their own story, one far removed from Jake's world of discipline and service. They were a reckless, entitled group. Mark, the ringleader with a sharp tongue and a defiant smirk. Jenna, whose laughter often masked insecurity. And their circle of friends, each fueled by a reckless sense of invincibility. To them, the video was a badge of bravado, a momentary thrill captured on a screen they shared with little thought of consequence. Their suburban lives were sheltered in many ways, wrapped in the comforts of middle-class privilege. They saw their actions not as cruelty, but as harmless fun, an escape from boredom and the pressures of adolescence. The park, a place where children's laughter usually echoed, had become for them a stage for dominance, a place to wield power over a helpless creature and, by extension, their own insecurities. Maplewood itself was a town caught between appearances and realities. Neatly trimmed hedges and pastel-painted houses lined the streets, and neighbors exchanged friendly nods over freshly mowed lawns. Yet beneath this picture-perfect surface, apathy and indifference simmered. Many residents had heard whispers of the video but dismissed it as a youthful prank, something that would blow over with time. The town's collective conscience was clouded by a reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths, preferring the illusion of harmony over the messy work of justice. Jake felt this divide keenly. At the local coffee shop, where he often gathered his thoughts, the topic was a hushed undercurrent in conversations. Some patrons expressed outrage, others questioned the severity of the reaction. "Kids will be kids," one man said dismissively, stirring his black coffee. "It's not like they meant real harm." Another woman shook her head, her voice tinged with worry. "But the dog, it looked terrified. How can anyone excuse that?" Jake's presence in Maplewood was a quiet challenge to the prevailing apathy. His reputation as a former SEAL lent weight to his words. But even so, many preferred to turn away from the harsh light he shone on their community's failure. He recognized the stubbornness of denial, the way people clung to comfortable narratives, even when faced with evidence of cruelty. The teenagers remained largely unrepentant as well. Mark, emboldened by social media attention, flaunted his defiance online. He posted mocking comments under the video, taunting those who condemned him and his friends. "Get a life," he wrote, unaware or uncaring of the storm he was inviting. His friends echoed his sentiments, their bravado masking a fragile sense of self that crumbled only behind closed doors. Jake, however, saw beyond the surface. He understood that these teenagers were products of their environment, neglect, lack of guidance, and a community unwilling to hold them accountable had shaped their reckless cruelty. His military training had taught him to assess threats and vulnerabilities with clarity. And here, the threat was not just the teens' actions, but the broader failure of the town to protect its own. In the quiet of his home, Jake reflected on the parallels between his past and present battles. Just as he had led teams through hostile territories, he now faced a different kind of mission, one requiring patience, strategy, and unwavering commitment. The fight was no longer against armed enemies, but against ignorance, denial, and the corrosive effect of indifference. Luna lay by his side, sensing his resolve. Her gentle nudge as he sat at his desk was a reminder that he was not alone in this fight. Together, they embodied a force of calm determination, a counterpoint to the chaos and cruelty rippling through Maplewood. The town's atmosphere grew heavier as days passed. Parents whispered in school hallways, some defending their children, others grappling with shame. Teachers exchanged concerned glances, unsure how to address the undercurrents of violence and neglect that had surfaced. The police, caught between duty and community pressure, wavered in their response, reflecting the town's broader ambivalence. Jake reached out to neighbors, community leaders, and anyone willing to listen. He organized informal gatherings, urging people to confront the reality of the situation and to demand accountability. His approach was calm but firm, a steady hand guiding a community teetering on the edge of division. At one such meeting in the local community center, the room was filled with a mix of emotions: anger, denial, sorrow, and a tentative hope. Jake spoke plainly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and conviction. "This isn't just about a dog," he said. "It's about what we tolerate in our community. It's about who we choose to protect and who we allow to suffer. If we look away now, we are complicit." Some in the room nodded, their eyes shining with the beginnings of resolve. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to confront the implications. Among the attendees were parents of the teenagers, some defensive, asserting that their children were good kids who made a mistake. The tension was palpable, a microcosm of the town's struggle. Outside the meeting, Jake's message began to ripple through Maplewood. Local media picked up the story, amplifying the conversation. Animal welfare groups expressed interest, offering resources and support. The community was awakening to the reality that justice required more than outrage. It required collective action. Yet, even as support grew, resistance remained. Some saw Jake's crusade as an intrusion, an unwelcome challenge to the status quo. They whispered that he was stirring trouble where there was none, that his military past made him too rigid, too harsh. The divide deepened, threatening to fracture the fragile bonds holding the town together. Through it all, Jake remained steadfast. He knew that change was rarely easy or swift. It demanded persistence, empathy, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. His past had prepared him for this. Missions where failure was not an option, where leadership meant standing firm in the face of adversity. In quieter moments, Jake thought about the dog, the innocent victim whose suffering had ignited this fire. He imagined her trembling in the park, her eyes wide with fear, and vowed that her pain would not be in vain. Hope, as he had come to think of her, was more than a name. She was a symbol of the community's capacity for compassion and change. As the sun set over Maplewood, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Jake and Luna walked home in silence. The town was far from healed, its wounds raw and visible. But beneath the surface, a current of determination flowed, a promise that Maplewood would no longer close its eyes to cruelty, that it would fight for its most vulnerable. Jake's mission had only just begun, and with Luna by his side, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road would be difficult, marked by resistance and uncertainty, but he understood that true strength came from standing firm in the face of injustice. Maplewood, with all its flaws and hopes, was worth fighting for. The video had begun as a whisper in the quiet corners of Maplewood. But now it roared through the town like a storm. Faces scrolled across screens, fingers tapped out messages, and voices rose in heated debate. The once peaceful suburb was fracturing under the weight of outrage and denial, as the footage of the dog's brutal beating ignited passions and fears alike. Local news outlets, sensing the growing unrest, began to cover the story with increasing urgency. At the heart of the coverage was Jake Reynolds, whose steady presence and unwavering commitment had made him the town's reluctant spokesperson for justice. He found himself fielding calls from reporters, his calm voice contrasting sharply with the emotional turmoil the story stirred in Maplewood's residents. But alongside the growing calls for accountability came a wave of resistance. Parents of the teenagers who appeared in the video dismissed the incident as a case of youthful indiscretion, a mistake blown out of proportion by a society quick to judge. "They're good kids," one mother insisted at a town hall meeting, her voice trembling between defensiveness and denial. "This isn't who they are. They made a bad choice, but they deserve a chance to learn from it." Her words echoed in the community center, met with a mixture of nods and murmurs of dissent. Some attendees, moved by the video's cruelty, demanded swift action and legal consequences. Others, caught between loyalty to their children and the moral weight of the incident, wrestled with conflicting emotions. Jake listened carefully, understanding the complexity beneath the surface. The teenagers were not monsters. They were misguided youths, products of a community that had failed to teach empathy and responsibility. Yet, the cruelty they inflicted was real and unambiguous. The challenge was clear: how to hold them accountable without abandoning the possibility of redemption. The local police department, led by Chief Harold Simmons, found itself in the eye of the storm. Public pressure mounted for the authorities to act decisively, but Chief Simmons faced a delicate balancing act. Influential parents whispered in his ear, urging leniency and caution. The department's resources were stretched thin, and the legal framework around animal cruelty was limited, leaving the officers grappling with how to proceed. At a meeting of town officials, tensions ran high. The mayor, flanked by skeptical council members, debated the best course of action. Some argued for a quiet resolution, hoping to avoid scandal and preserve Maplewood's image. Others pushed for transparency and reform, recognizing that ignoring the problem would only deepen the community's wounds. Meanwhile, online forums and social media became battlegrounds of opinion and outrage. Mark, the ringleader of the teenagers, taunted Jake and others who condemned his actions. "Who cares?" he posted under the viral video. "It's just a dog. People need to chill." His words ignited fury and disbelief, crystallizing the divide between those demanding justice and those sheltering behind excuses. Jake, though frustrated by the provocation, refused to respond with anger. His military training had instilled in him the importance of measured responses and strategic patience. Instead, he focused on gathering support, building alliances with community leaders, animal welfare advocates, and concerned citizens who shared his vision for change. Recognizing the need for a united front, Jake organized a community meeting at the local library. The room filled quickly, packed with residents eager to voice their concerns and hear solutions. Some came with anger, others with tears, and many with a deep desire for healing. Jake stood at the front, his presence commanding attention without intimidation. "This is not just about one act of cruelty," he began, his voice steady and clear. "It's about the values we uphold as a community. It's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves and teaching our children the difference between right and wrong." He spoke of accountability, of the need for consequences balanced with compassion. He urged the community to look beyond anger and finger-pointing to understand the root causes: neglect, lack of guidance, and a culture that too often excuses bad behavior. The meeting grew into a forum of raw honesty. Parents admitted their failures, teenagers spoke of peer pressure and confusion, and neighbors shared stories of witnessing cruelty but feeling powerless to intervene. A local teacher described the challenges of instilling empathy in a generation bombarded by desensitizing images and distractions. Amid the turmoil, a tentative sense of solidarity began to emerge. The community realized that the problem was not isolated, but symptomatic of deeper issues requiring collective effort. Plans were proposed for educational programs in schools, increased support for animal welfare, and community patrols to safeguard vulnerable neighborhoods. Jake's call to action resonated beyond Maplewood's borders. Animal rights organizations reached out, offering resources and expertise. Journalists began to investigate systemic problems related to neglect and abuse, uncovering stories that had long been buried beneath the town's polished exterior. Yet resistance lingered. Some parents continued to defend their children vehemently, unwilling to accept the severity of their actions. Others feared the stigma that public scrutiny would bring, urging Jake to temper his crusade for the sake of community harmony. In the midst of these tensions, Jake received a direct message from Mark. The teenager's tone was mocking, but tinged with a hint of uncertainty. "Think you're some kind of hero, huh? Let's see how far you get." The threat was thinly veiled, a challenge issued from behind a screen. Jake shared the message with Chief Simmons, who acknowledged the need for vigilance, but warned of the delicate line between enforcement and escalation. The police increased patrols around areas frequented by the teenagers, seeking to prevent further incidents and protect vulnerable residents. Throughout it all, Luna remained Jake's steadfast companion. Her presence offered comfort and strength, a reminder of the innocence and trust that must be preserved in the face of cruelty. Together, they patrolled parks and neighborhoods, symbols of hope and resilience. As days passed, the tension in Maplewood intensified. Schools implemented discussions on empathy and responsibility. Local businesses displayed posters advocating kindness, and neighborhood watches formed. The struggle for accountability became a catalyst for community engagement, sparking conversations that had long been avoided. Jake stood at the center of this awakening, his resolve unwavering. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, bureaucratic hurdles, social divides, and the stubbornness of denial. But he also sensed a shift. The town was beginning to confront its shadows, to question complacency, and to demand better. In quiet moments, Jake reflected on the video that had sparked this turmoil. The dog's terrified eyes haunted him, a call to action that could not be ignored. He vowed to see this fight through, not just for the animal's sake, but for the soul of Maplewood itself. The battle lines were drawn, and the community stood at a crossroads. Jake's presence was a beacon, a steady force urging healing through accountability. The confrontation had only just begun, but the ripples of change were spreading, promising a reckoning that would test the town's character and resolve. The sun had barely risen over Maplewood when Jake Reynolds laced up his boots, a familiar ritual that grounded him for the challenges ahead. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming magnolias, a stark contrast to the storm that had been brewing in the town's conscience. Today was different. Today, Jake decided, he would no longer wait for others to act. His military training, etched into muscle memory through years of grueling discipline, surged to the forefront. Calm, methodical, and precise. Jake knew that to confront the recklessness festering in his community, he needed more than words. He needed action. The teenagers who had tormented the dog were emboldened by inaction, their defiance fueled by a community unwilling to hold them accountable. It was time to shift the balance. Luna padded silently beside him, her golden fur glistening in the morning light. She was more than a companion. She was a partner in this mission, a living symbol of protection and empathy. Together, they moved through the neighborhoods, Jake's keen eyes scanning for signs of the teenager's presence or other vulnerabilities. His approach was strategic, quiet but deliberate, scouting out areas where the reckless youths might gather or where further cruelty could occur. The park where the abuse had taken place now bore a somber atmosphere. The swings hung still, and the usual laughter of children was replaced by wary glances from parents and cautious steps from those who remembered the violence. Jake paused near a cluster of trees, his mind replaying the video's haunting images. The dog's fearful eyes burned into his memory, a reminder that this mission was personal. Word had spread quickly that Jake was taking matters into his own hands. Neighbors watched from their porches, some with hope, others with skepticism. The line between vigilante and protector was thin in a town unaccustomed to such direct action. But Jake moved with the quiet confidence of one who knew the stakes. His first encounter came sooner than expected. Near a rundown basketball court, he spotted a trio of teenagers huddled in shadows. Mark among them, his posture cocky but guarded. Jake approached calmly, Luna at his side, her presence imposing yet non-threatening. The teens noticed him, but made no move to flee. "Mark," Jake said, voice even but firm, "we need to talk." Mark's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "What's your deal?" he challenged, though the bravado in his tone was thin. Jake met his gaze steadily. "Your actions have consequences. The video isn't just a joke, it's evidence. And it's made this town uncomfortable with the way you treat others, especially those who can't defend themselves." Mark laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "You think you're some kind of hero? This is just a dog. People overreact." Jake shook his head. "It's not just about the dog. It's about respect, responsibility, and community. I'm here to make sure you understand that." The other teens shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Luna's steady presence was a silent warning. Her trained instincts sensed the tension and projected calm authority. The message was clear. Jake was not to be taken lightly. This encounter was only the beginning. Over the next days, Jake used his military-honed skills to track the movements and habits of the teenagers, mapping their hangouts and routines. His approach was not confrontational, but strategic, gathering information, building a case, and signaling to the teens that their actions would no longer be ignored. Luna, ever at his side, reinforced his mission. She greeted neighbors with warmth, easing fears and fostering trust. Her calm demeanor contrasted with the growing unease among the teenagers, who found themselves watched, their recklessness curtailed by an invisible presence. Jake's efforts extended beyond surveillance. He began working with local schools and community centers, proposing programs to educate youths about empathy, responsibility, and the impact of their actions. His military background lent credibility to his message. And slowly, some parents and educators began to listen. Yet resistance remained. Mark and his friends continued to provoke online, their taunts a mixture of bravado and frustration. "Who's this guy thinking he is?" one post read. "Just a guy with a dog trying to ruin our lives." Jake knew that fear and denial fueled their defiance. But his calm, strategic approach was designed to outlast their bravado. He wasn't seeking a quick victory, but a lasting change. The local police, initially hesitant, began to cooperate more closely with Jake. Chief Simmons recognized the value of Jake's discipline and insight, and while wary of overstepping, he saw the potential for effective intervention. Together, they coordinated patrols and shared information, creating a network aimed at preventing further abuse and holding the teenagers accountable. One afternoon, Jake received a call from a neighbor reporting suspicious behavior near a vacant lot, a place where the teens had been seen before. Without hesitation, Jake and Luna moved swiftly, arriving to find the group gathered, their voices low but tense. Jake stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "I told you, your actions have consequences," he said quietly but firmly. Mark's defiance cracked. "You don't scare me." He spat, but the edge was gone. Jake's gaze was steady. "This isn't about fear. It's about responsibility. You have a choice to change or face the consequences." The confrontation was brief but pivotal. The teens scattered, their confidence shaken. For the first time, they sensed that their actions were being challenged not just by words, but by unwavering resolve. Back at home, Jake sat with Luna, reflecting on the day's events. The road ahead was long, and the challenges many. But the shift was palpable. The reckless teenagers who had once ruled the park with impunity were now cautious, their actions constrained by the knowledge that someone was watching, someone who cared. Jake's mission was not about punishment alone. It was about transformation. He reached out to community leaders, proposing rehabilitation programs and counseling for the teens, recognizing that true change required support, not just discipline. The town began to stir with cautious optimism. Parents who had once defended their children's missteps now faced the reality of their actions. Schools embraced new curricula focused on empathy and responsibility. The park, once a place of fear, showed signs of renewal as families returned with wary hope. Throughout it all, Luna remained a constant, a symbol of protection, hope, and the quiet power of compassion. Her presence softened hardened hearts and reminded the community of what was at stake. Jake knew that vigilance was essential. The battle against cruelty and apathy was ongoing, requiring patience, strategy, and unwavering commitment. But with each step, Maplewood edged closer to healing. As twilight settled over the town, Jake walked Luna along the familiar streets. The soft glow of street lamps cast long shadows, and the scent of blooming jasmine filled the air. Maplewood was far from perfect, but it was waking up, learning to stand against cruelty and embrace compassion. And Jake, with Luna by his side, was ready to lead the way. The tension in Maplewood was palpable as news of Jake Reynolds' actions spread through the town like wildfire. Where once there had been quiet indifference, now voices rose, some in support, others in opposition, fracturing the community along lines of loyalty, fear, and principle. The town's atmosphere shifted, the familiar rhythms of suburban life interrupted by debates that spilled from kitchen tables into social media threads and public forums. Jake found himself at the epicenter of this growing storm, a reluctant leader thrust into a battle that extended far beyond the cruel beating of a dog. His calm presence and unwavering commitment had won him allies, but also fierce critics who questioned his methods and motives. The conflict was no longer just about the teenagers. It had become a referendum on justice, accountability, and the soul of Maplewood itself. The community's division was most visible during the town hall meeting convened to address the escalating outrage. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken grievances. Parents, neighbors, local officials, and teenagers gathered, their faces a mosaic of hope, skepticism, and defiance. Jake stood at the podium, his posture steady, voice measured but firm. "We are at a crossroads," he began. "This incident has exposed cracks in our community, cracks that we must acknowledge and repair together. It's not enough to condemn actions after the fact. We must build a culture of respect, empathy, and responsibility." His words were met with a mixture of applause and murmurs of dissent. Some parents bristled, defending their children as misunderstood or unfairly targeted. Others nodded solemnly, burdened by guilt or the weight of responsibility. Chief Harold Simmons took the floor next, his tone conciliatory yet cautious. "Our department is committed to ensuring the safety of all residents and holding those responsible accountable. But we must balance enforcement with community trust. We are working closely with Mr. Reynolds and other stakeholders to address these challenges." Despite the official reassurances, the divide deepened. Some parents accused law enforcement of overreach, fearing their children would face harsh punishment for a momentary lapse. Others demanded stricter measures, arguing that leniency would only embolden future cruelty. In the corridors outside the meeting, conversations crackled with tension. Neighbors whispered about loyalty and betrayal, the fragility of community bonds laid bare. The teenagers themselves, once brash and unrepentant, found themselves caught in the crossfire of public scrutiny and parental defense. Jake observed these dynamics with a strategist's eye. Recognizing that progress required more than rhetoric, it demanded empathy and coalition building. He began reaching out to community leaders, educators, and faith groups, seeking common ground and shared purpose. One afternoon, Jake organized a gathering at the Maplewood Community Center, inviting residents from all walks of life. The room was filled with cautious optimism as people exchanged stories, fears, and hopes. Parents admitted their struggles to guide their children amidst peer pressure and societal distractions. Teachers spoke of the challenges of fostering empathy in a digital age saturated with desensitizing images. Jake listened intently, then shared his vision. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. Together, we can create programs that teach compassion and accountability, support families, and ensure no one is left behind, human or animal." His words resonated, inspiring a tentative coalition. Volunteers stepped forward to mentor youth. Local businesses pledged support for educational initiatives, and animal welfare groups offered resources to enhance community outreach. Yet, not all were convinced. Some parents remained defensive, unwilling to accept that their children bore responsibility. Others feared the stigma of the scandal would tarnish Maplewood's reputation. The path to unity was fraught with challenges. Meanwhile, the digital battlefield intensified. Mark and his friends continued to taunt Jake and supporters online, their reckless bravado a mask for growing anxiety. Jake resisted the urge to engage directly, focusing instead on building positive momentum within the community. Local media coverage brought national attention to Maplewood's struggle, amplifying both support and criticism. Animal rights organizations amplified calls for justice, while some commentators cautioned against rushing to judgment. In the midst of this turmoil, Jake found solace in Luna's steady companionship. Her gentle presence reminded him of the mission's core, the protection of the vulnerable, and the cultivation of kindness. The school district, prompted by community pressure, introduced new curricula focused on empathy, responsibility, and conflict resolution. Educators reported initial resistance from some students, but noted gradual shifts as conversations deepened. Neighborhood watch groups expanded their efforts, collaborating with law enforcement to monitor vulnerable areas and report concerns. This grassroots engagement fostered a renewed sense of collective responsibility. Despite progress, Jake knew the battle was far from over. The fractures in Maplewood's social fabric ran deep, and healing required sustained effort and patience. At a community event held in the park where the abuse had occurred, Jake addressed a gathering of residents, children, and volunteers. The sun filtered through budding leaves, casting dappled light on faces marked by hope and determination. "This park symbolizes both our challenges and our potential," Jake said. "It witnessed cruelty, but it can also be a place of healing. Together, we can ensure that kindness prevails, that every member of this community, human and animal alike, is treated with dignity." As applause rippled through the crowd, Jake felt a surge of optimism tempered by realism. Change was slow, fraught with setbacks and resistance, but the seeds of transformation had been planted. Maplewood was learning to confront its shadows, to bridge divides, and to embrace a future shaped by accountability and compassion. Jake's leadership, grounded in resilience and empathy, had become a catalyst for this awakening. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but the community's collective heartbeat had quickened. In this fragile new chapter, the choices of individuals would determine whether Maplewood could become a beacon of hope and healing. Jake looked out over the crowd, Luna at his side, and silently vowed to continue standing for those who could not stand for themselves. The fight for justice was no longer his alone. It was the community's to carry forward. The video that had once flickered quietly across Maplewood's social feeds had now erupted into a wildfire of attention, spreading far beyond the town's borders. National news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting the harrowing footage of the dogs beating to audiences unfamiliar with the peaceful veneer of the suburban community. Animal rights organizations issued statements condemning the cruelty, their logos and calls to action appearing alongside hashtags that trended across platforms. Maplewood was no longer just a dot on a map. It had become a symbol of a deeper societal struggle between neglect and compassion. Jake Reynolds watched the swell of public outrage with a mixture of apprehension and hope. The spotlight brought pressure on local authorities, parents, and the teenagers themselves. But it also offered an opportunity for meaningful change. The town's simmering tensions were now under a harsh glare, forcing conversations that had long been deferred. The influx of media crews transformed Maplewood streets. Cameras rolled past white picket fences, capturing interviews with tearful neighbors and impassioned advocates. Jake found himself navigating a delicate balance, welcoming the attention that could drive reform while shielding the community from the invasive glare of sensationalism. At the heart of this maelstrom was Jake's steadfast commitment. His calm demeanor and measured words stood in contrast to the emotional swirl, providing a steadying influence. Animal welfare groups reached out, offering resources, expertise, and funding to support initiatives aimed at preventing cruelty and fostering empathy. One morning, Jake received a call from the director of a prominent animal rights organization. Their offer was clear. They wanted to partner with Maplewood, providing training workshops, educational materials, and advocacy tools to amplify the town's efforts. For Jake, this was a validation of the work underway, a bridge connecting local struggles to a broader movement. The teenagers' video had become a catalyst, sparking dialogues in schools, churches, and town halls. Parents who had once dismissed the incident began to reckon with its gravity. Educators integrated lessons on empathy and responsibility into their curricula, supported by materials provided by national groups. Community centers hosted forums that drew diverse crowds, all grappling with the uncomfortable truths laid bare. Yet, as the spotlight grew, so did the pressures. Some local officials, wary of the negative publicity, sought to downplay the incident or shift blame. Efforts to obstruct investigations surfaced, subtle but persistent. Jake sensed these undercurrents and knew that vigilance was essential to ensure that justice was not sacrificed for reputation. Mark and his friends, once emboldened by anonymity, found themselves under intense scrutiny. The national attention brought legal advocates and social workers into Maplewood, assessing the teens' backgrounds and the extent of their families' involvement or neglect. The pressure fractured the group. Some expressed remorse, others retreated into silence or defiance. Jake collaborated closely with these organizations, working to balance accountability with support. He understood that punishment alone would not heal the wounds or prevent recurrence. Rehabilitation, education, and community engagement were vital. The town's response took shape in tangible ways. A local shelter expanded its capacity, funded in part by donations sparked by the coverage. Schools piloted programs emphasizing kindness and responsibility, with Jake invited to speak alongside experts. Neighborhood groups organized patrols and outreach events, fostering a renewed sense of vigilance. Social media campaigns amplified these efforts, with hashtags encouraging acts of kindness and raising awareness about animal welfare. The story that had begun with cruelty was now evolving into one of hope and transformation. Yet challenges persisted. Some residents bristled at the intrusion of national media, feeling exposed and judged. The teenagers' families grappled with shame and defensiveness, complicating efforts at reconciliation. Jake found himself navigating these complex emotions, balancing empathy with the imperative for change. One afternoon, as Jake prepared for a panel discussion hosted by an animal rights coalition, he reflected on the journey thus far. The road had been arduous, marked by resistance and setbacks, but also by moments of profound connection and growth. The abused dog, now rescued and receiving care, had become a symbol, her story a rallying cry for communities everywhere. Luna rested at his feet, her steady breathing a comforting presence. Together, they embodied the quiet strength needed to sustain the fight. The panel discussion was broadcast live, reaching viewers across the country. Jake spoke candidly about Maplewood's challenges and aspirations, emphasizing the power of community action and empathy. He called on viewers to recognize their role in protecting the voiceless, urging vigilance and compassion. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in, along with offers of assistance and invitations to collaborate. Maplewood's story had transcended its borders, becoming a beacon for others grappling with similar issues. Back in town, the momentum continued. Local officials, pressured by the national spotlight, initiated investigations and promised reforms. Schools expanded their programs, and community groups mobilized with renewed energy. Jake remained at the forefront, his military discipline and unwavering compassion guiding the complex dance of advocacy and action. He knew the battle was far from over, but took heart in the growing coalition of voices united against cruelty. As evening fell over Maplewood, the streets once shadowed by fear now hummed with cautious optimism. The video that had ignited outrage had also sparked a movement, one fueled by determination, empathy, and the belief that even the smallest community could inspire change on a grand scale. Jake looked out over the town from his porch, Luna beside him, and felt a quiet resolve. The fight for justice and compassion was ongoing. But with each step, Maplewood was moving closer to the future it deserved. The early morning sun cast long shadows over Maplewood's quiet streets as Jake Reynolds met with Maria Lopez in the cramped back room of the local cafe. Maria, an investigative journalist from the regional newspaper, had arrived equipped with a notebook full of questions and a determination that matched Jake's own resolve. The conversation between them was charged with urgency. Both recognized that beneath the surface of the dog's brutal beating lay a darker, more pervasive problem in their community. Maria had spent weeks digging into the lives of the teenagers involved in the video, uncovering stories that painted a troubling picture of neglect, dysfunction, and unspoken suffering. She shared her findings with Jake in hushed tones, aware that exposing these truths could ignite both healing and turmoil. One family, in particular, stood out. A home where the parents were frequently absent, leaving the children to navigate a world without guidance or boundaries. Another teenager's household struggled with substance abuse, casting a long shadow over the child's behavior and choices. These revelations added layers of complexity to the public narrative, challenging simplistic notions of good and evil. Jake listened carefully, absorbing the weight of these stories. His military training had taught him to assess situations holistically, understanding that addressing symptoms without tackling root causes was a futile exercise. The cruelty inflicted on the dog was a manifestation of deeper wounds, wounds that demanded compassion as well as accountability. Together, Jake and Maria began to map out a strategy. The goal was clear: to build a compelling, nuanced case that would spur authorities to act decisively while galvanizing the community to address the underlying issues. They planned to gather testimonies from neighbors, teachers, and social workers, voices that could shed light on the environment that shaped the teenagers' actions. As Maria interviewed witnesses and compiled reports, Jake coordinated with local social services, seeking support for families struggling beneath the radar. He recognized that the path to justice was intertwined with the path to rehabilitation and prevention. The community, meanwhile, was beginning to feel the pressure. The initial shock of the video had evolved into a collective reckoning. Parents who had once defended their children now faced uncomfortable questions about their roles and responsibilities. Schools grappled with how to support troubled students while maintaining discipline. Amid this, the teenagers themselves grew restless. The weight of scrutiny fractured their once tight-knit group. Some expressed remorse in private conversations, their bravado giving way to fear and uncertainty. Others doubled down on defiance, retreating into silence or anger. Jake reached out to counselors and youth advocates, facilitating conversations aimed at healing and growth. He understood that punishment alone would not break the cycle. Empathy and support were crucial. One afternoon, Jake accompanied Maria to a neighborhood block party, an event intended to foster community spirit, but tinged with undercurrents of tension. As they moved through clusters of residents, whispers followed them. Some hopeful, others skeptical. A neighbor approached Jake hesitantly, sharing a story of a teenager's late-night wanderings, signs of neglect that had gone unnoticed. Another spoke of a family struggling silently, overwhelmed by challenges they were ill-equipped to face. These encounters underscored the urgency of their mission. The problem was not isolated or simple. It was systemic and deeply rooted. Back at the local library, Jake and Maria organized a community forum, inviting residents, social workers, educators, and law enforcement. The room buzzed with anticipation as stories were shared, frustrations aired, and ideas exchanged. Maria presented her investigative findings, shining a light on the hidden struggles within Maplewood. Her reporting was meticulous and compassionate, avoiding sensationalism while demanding accountability. Jake followed with a call to action. "We cannot turn a blind eye to the pain in our community," he urged. "Justice must be tempered with understanding. We must support families, educate our youth, and hold each other accountable." The forum sparked a wave of initiatives. Neighbors volunteered to mentor at-risk youth. Schools expanded counseling services. Local charities increased outreach to struggling families. The community began to stitch together a safety net where none had existed. Yet challenges remained. Some residents resisted change, fearing the implications of exposing family secrets and social failings. Others worried about stigmatizing the teenagers further, complicating efforts at rehabilitation. Jake navigated these complexities with patience and resolve, recognizing that healing was a slow, often painful process. In quiet moments, he reflected on the dog, now named Hope, whose suffering had illuminated the town's fractures. Hope's recovery mirrored the community's own journey from pain toward renewal. Luna, ever at his side, provided comfort and grounding. Her gentle presence was a reminder of the innocence worth protecting. As spring deepened, Maplewood streets began to hum with tentative hope. The community was awakening, confronting its shadows and taking steps toward transformation. Jake and Maria continued their partnership, committed to shining light on difficult truths and fostering the change Maplewood desperately needed. The path ahead was uncertain, but together, they carried the promise of healing and justice, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and collective action. The courtroom in Maplewood was tense, the air thick with anticipation as the teenagers faced the consequences of their actions. The video that had ignited outrage across the town had finally led to legal reckoning, a moment that bore the weight of justice and the hope for redemption. Families, neighbors, and community members filled the benches, their eyes fixed on the proceedings with a mix of sorrow, anger, and cautious optimism. Jake Reynolds sat near the front, Luna resting quietly at his feet. His posture was calm but alert, the discipline of his military past evident in the way he observed every detail. This was more than a legal battle. It was a pivotal moment for Maplewood's soul, a test of whether compassion and accountability could coexist. The teenagers, once defiant and unrepentant, now faced the gravity of their actions. The judge's voice was measured as he outlined the charges: animal cruelty, neglect, and endangerment. The courtroom listened as prosecutors presented evidence gathered through Jake's efforts and Maria Lopez's investigative reporting. Testimonies from neighbors, social workers, and experts detailing the environment of neglect and dysfunction that had contributed to the youth's behavior. The defense sought leniency, emphasizing the teenager's youth and the potential for rehabilitation. They argued that punitive measures alone would not heal the wounds or prevent future harm. The judge acknowledged these points, underscoring the need for a balanced approach that combined accountability with support. After deliberation, the court handed down sentences designed to foster growth and restitution. Mandatory rehabilitation programs focused on animal care and empathy, community service at local shelters, and counseling to address underlying behavioral issues. The ruling was met with mixed reactions. Relief from those who sought justice, tempered by unease from those who feared the measures were insufficient. Jake saw the decision as a necessary step toward healing. The teenager's participation in rehabilitation offered a path to transformation, a chance to break cycles of cruelty and neglect. He resolved to support these efforts, recognizing that true accountability extended beyond punishment. Local officials, embarrassed by earlier missteps and public criticism, moved swiftly to implement stricter policies on animal welfare and community oversight. New ordinances were passed, increasing penalties for cruelty and enhancing resources for prevention and education. Police protocols were revised to ensure timely and effective responses to reports of abuse. Schools incorporated expanded curricula emphasizing empathy, responsibility, and conflict resolution. Educators reported gradual improvements in student behavior and community engagement, crediting the collaborative efforts sparked by the case. Community organizations flourished, bolstered by increased funding and volunteer participation. Shelters expanded their capacity, offering rehabilitation and adoption services for abused animals. Neighborhood watches and outreach programs strengthened bonds among residents, fostering a culture of vigilance and compassion. Jake's role evolved from advocate to mentor, guiding initiatives and supporting families navigating challenges. He collaborated with social workers, educators, and law enforcement to sustain momentum and address emerging needs. The teenagers, through their mandated service and counseling, began to show signs of remorse and growth. Some volunteered at animal shelters beyond their required hours, seeking to make amends. Others participated in peer-led discussions, sharing their experiences to deter others from similar paths. The community's response illustrated the power of collective action rooted in empathy and accountability. Maplewood was learning to confront its flaws, embracing the difficult work of healing and change. Jake reflected on the journey from that first harrowing video to this moment of tentative hope. The abused dog, now fully rehabilitated and named Hope, had become a living symbol of resilience, adopted by a loving family committed to her care. Luna's quiet companionship remained a source of strength, a reminder of the innocence and trust worth protecting. As the town moved forward, the scars of the past lingered but no longer defined Maplewood. The community had chosen a path of responsibility and compassion, forging a legacy that honored both justice and redemption. Jake knew the work was ongoing, that vigilance and care must be sustained. But he took solace in the progress made, the transformation of pain into purpose, cruelty into compassion. Maplewood's story was one of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of courage and collective will. Hope's golden fur shimmered softly in the late afternoon sun as she romped joyfully through the backyard of her new home. The once frightened and battered dog had blossomed into a symbol of resilience and renewal. Her eyes, once wide with terror, now sparkled with trust and affection, reflecting the care and love that had saved her. The family that adopted her, kind-hearted and patient, had become a testament to the healing power of compassion. Maplewood itself was undergoing a quiet transformation, mirroring Hope's journey from pain to recovery. The wounds inflicted by cruelty still lingered beneath the surface, but the community was knitting itself back together with threads of empathy and understanding. Volunteers at the local animal shelter reported increased interest and support, many inspired by Hope's story and the town's collective commitment to change. Some of the teenagers involved in the abuse, their mandated rehabilitation behind them, had taken tentative steps toward redemption. They began volunteering at animal shelters and community centers, their efforts both a penance and a path to personal growth. Their faces, once shadowed by defiance, now carried glimpses of remorse and the difficult acceptance of responsibility. Jake Reynolds watched these developments with a mixture of pride and cautious hope. His role had evolved from a solitary crusader to a mentor and advocate, bridging divides and fostering understanding. He worked tirelessly alongside educators, social workers, and community leaders to create programs that nurtured empathy and accountability among Maplewood's youth. Schools incorporated these lessons into their curricula, emphasizing kindness, respect, and the importance of standing up for the vulnerable. Teachers reported that students were engaging more deeply, discussing issues of cruelty and compassion with newfound seriousness. The ripple effects extended beyond the classroom, influencing family dynamics and neighborhood interactions. Neighborhood watch groups had grown in number and strength, fostering a culture of vigilance balanced with care. Residents looked out for one another, recognizing the community's safety depended on collective responsibility. Local businesses contributed resources and sponsorships for animal welfare initiatives, further embedding the values of kindness into the town's fabric. At community events, conversations about healing and transformation became common, signaling a shift in the collective consciousness. Maplewood was no longer a town defined by its darkest moments, but by its capacity to learn, grow, and support one another. Jake found particular solace in moments spent with Luna, whose steady presence anchored him amid the ongoing challenges. Their walks through the town's parks and streets were reminders of the innocence and trust worth protecting, a daily affirmation of the mission that had become his life's work. The teenagers who had once been the perpetrators of cruelty continued to grapple with their past actions. Some embraced the opportunities for change, seeking to rebuild their reputations and contribute positively. Others struggled, weighed down by guilt and the lingering stigma. Community support networks aimed to assist these youths, recognizing that redemption was a journey requiring patience and encouragement. Families affected by the ordeal began to heal as well, participating in counseling and support groups that addressed the underlying issues of neglect and dysfunction. These efforts fostered stronger bonds and healthier environments for children and adults alike. Maplewood's renewed commitment to compassion found expression in a community art project dedicated to animals and kindness. Local artists, students, and volunteers collaborated to create murals and sculptures that celebrated the town's journey from pain to hope. The installations became gathering points for reflection and inspiration, visible reminders of the values the community aspired to uphold. Jake stood before one such mural on a crisp autumn morning, the colors vibrant against the backdrop of fiery leaves. The artwork depicted hope at the center, surrounded by images of caring hands, protective paws, and smiling faces. It was a tribute not only to the dog's survival, but to the collective effort that had made healing possible. As he gazed at the mural, Jake reflected on the path traveled, the moments of despair and courage, the fractures and the mending. The journey had revealed the profound impact of vigilance and second chances, the importance of standing up for those who cannot defend themselves. He thought of the countless individuals who had come together, each playing a role in transforming Maplewood's narrative. Their courage and compassion had forged a new identity for the town, one rooted in empathy, accountability, and hope. Luna nuzzled his hand gently, a silent companion in this moment of reflection. Together, they embodied the spirit of resilience that had come to define Maplewood. The road ahead remained uncertain, marked by ongoing challenges and the need for sustained commitment. But the community's renewed dedication offered a foundation upon which to build a future where kindness prevailed. Jake knew that the story was far from over. It was a living, evolving testament to the power of human connection and the capacity for growth. Maplewood's embrace of compassion and accountability had set in motion a legacy that would endure. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the town, Jake and Luna continued their walk, stepping forward with quiet determination. Theirs was a journey shared with a community transformed, one that had learned to heal, to forgive, and to protect the vulnerable with unwavering resolve. The morning sun bathed Maplewood in a soft, golden light as the community gathered in the town square for the unveiling of a new art installation. The centerpiece was a mural that stretched along the side of the community center, a vibrant tapestry of colors and images dedicated to animals and kindness. Each brushstroke told a story. The battered dog, now named Hope, resting peacefully, children reaching out with gentle hands, and silhouettes of neighbors standing united. The mural was more than art. It was a symbol of the town's journey from pain to healing. Jake Reynolds stood among the crowd, Luna faithfully at his side. The air was thick with a collective sense of accomplishment and reflection. Faces young and old bore expressions of hope mingled with the weight of what had been endured. It was a moment to honor the resilience of a town that had confronted its darkest moments and emerged with a renewed commitment to compassion. As the mayor stepped forward to address the assembled residents, Jake's thoughts drifted to the long road that had brought them here. The video that had once shattered the town's tranquility had sparked a fire, a battle against cruelty, apathy, and denial. But it had also ignited courage, empathy, and a determination to stand up for the voiceless. Mayor Thompson's voice carried across the square, steady and heartfelt. Today, we celebrate not just this beautiful mural, but the spirit of Maplewood, a community that chooses kindness over indifference, accountability over silence. This artwork is a testament to the power of second chances and the strength that comes from standing together. Applause rippled through the crowd, a chorus of agreement and unity. Jake felt a swell of pride, tempered by the knowledge that this was not the end, but a new beginning. The mural was a beacon, a reminder that vigilance and courage were ongoing responsibilities. After the ceremony, Jake found a quiet moment beside the mural, tracing the painted outline of hope with his eyes. The dog's peaceful gaze seemed to hold the promise of renewal, a silent call to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Luna nuzzled his hand, grounding him in the present as memories of past struggles flickered through his mind. He reflected on the countless individuals whose courage had shaped this journey, the neighbors who refused to look away, the educators who fostered empathy, the law enforcement officers who sought justice, and the volunteers who gave their time and hearts to mend broken bonds. Jake's own path had transformed from a solitary mission to a shared crusade. His military discipline had given way to a leadership rooted in compassion and community. He had learned that true strength lay not only in action, but in the willingness to listen, understand, and inspire. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over Maplewood, families and friends mingled beneath the mural, sharing stories and laughter. Children played nearby, their joyful sounds weaving into the fabric of a town reborn. Jake's gaze met that of a young boy who shyly approached, holding a small sketch of a dog. The child's eyes shone with admiration as he extended the drawing toward Jake. "This is for Hope," he said softly. Jake knelt to accept the gift, his voice gentle. "Thank you. It's beautiful. Hope is lucky to have a friend like you." The boy smiled, a spark of kindness ignited. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, Jake and Luna walked along the town's tree-lined streets. The air was fragrant with blooming flowers, and the soft rustle of leaves whispered of renewal. The mural stood tall behind them, a constant reminder of the journey and the promise ahead. Jake pondered the story Maplewood now told, a story of vigilance, courage, and second chances. It was a narrative that transcended the pain of the past, embracing the power of community and the enduring human capacity for kindness. He knew the path forward would not be without challenges. The scars of cruelty and neglect could resurface, and the fight to protect the vulnerable would require constant vigilance. But the town had learned to stand together, to listen and act, and to hold one another accountable. Luna trotted beside him, her tail wagging gently, a living symbol of hope and protection. As they reached the edge of the square, Jake paused and looked back one last time. The mural glowed softly in the afternoon light, a beacon for all who passed by. A call to remember, to act, and to care. In that moment, Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on his shoulders. The journey was far from over, But with a community awakened and hearts united, Maplewood was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together, they would continue to stand for those who could not stand for themselves, weaving a legacy of compassion that would endure for generations to come.